So can you make $50,000 using an expert advisor? This video is based on a strategy that was published by Trade and Get Paid. You can see I've got this up here, and I'll put a link in the description where you can find this video where he fully describes his strategy. I don't know if this is a good or a bad strategy. I haven't done any work to verify this or test the strategy at all, but I thought it was a good idea to try to write an expert advisor that implemented this. The strategy has been reviewed by Trade Pro, and I'll also put a link to the Trade Pro video in the description below. The Trade Pro review shows that this strategy is perhaps not as successful as it was claimed. But then again, there is some interpretation, and perhaps it wasn't implemented exactly as planned. So I'll leave it to you to decide whether this is a good or a bad strategy. I am not promoting the strategy in any way, but it is interesting for programming purposes. The strategy itself, as described, there are parts of it where it's a little ambiguous. There are other parts where it's not entirely suitable for directly implementing as an automated strategy, because they do take some judgment calls. So here's my interpretation of the strategy. So if you think that I've made any mistakes here in implementing the strategy, then leave a comment and perhaps I'll do a follow-up video on that. If you know of any other strategies that you would like me to do the same thing for and write an expert advisor for them, then feel free to leave a comment with a link where I can find the strategy, whether it's a video or documented somewhere. And if it's suitable for implementation as an expert advisor, I may make a video on that in the future. But these are the rules that I've implemented based on this strategy. It uses two indicators: a 9-period simple moving average based on close, a 20-period Bollinger Band with 2 deviations on the close price. The strategy will sell when the candle closes inside the bands and the previous candle has closed above the upper band. And the buy signal will be when the candle closes inside the bands and the previous candle closed below the lower band. It's in two parts. So part one has a take profit at the 9-period simple moving average, and the stop loss is then at a 1-to-1 ratio from the entry price to that simple moving average. Now, although it's not specified in the strategy, that implies that the candle or the current price should be below the 9-period simple moving average when we enter for a buy, or above that for a sell. The strategy also says that there's a second part where we, at the take profit on the 9-period simple moving average, close part of the trade and let the rest of the trade run until the price reaches the Bollinger Band midline. And when that happens, we move the stop loss for the second part to the break even. There is also a discussion of possibly letting a third part of the trade run until it reaches the opposite side of the Bollinger Band. But the rules around that are much more subjective, and I thought they were unsuitable for implementing in an expert advisor. Now, with all of these rules, the video is becoming a little long, so I've actually split it into two parts. So today I'm only covering part one. It'll be a single trade with full exit at the 9-period simple moving average. And then I'll release a second part video where I show how we're going to split the trade at that 9-period SMA and let the second part run until the midline. When the second part is released, I will also add a link in the description of this video where you can find that second part, and I'll put a link on screen here to point at that. So let's go straight to the code and show how we would write this. I have the MT4 editor open here, and I'm going to do something a little different this time. Rather than, as I usually do, have a completely separate expert for MT4 and MT5, I'm going to keep the experts short and then put all of the common code into a class file as an include, and that will be common between the MT4 and MT5. It should become clearer as I go ahead. And you can see I've already got two tabs open here. There's the MQ4 and the MQ5, so I'll edit them both in the MT4 editor. And at the moment, they're both blank. So I'll just start with the usual comments and properties. And here I have the include statement for the class file that I'm going to bring in. And this is an include with the quotation marks rather than the angle brackets, and that means I'm just going to pull it in from the same folder where this file is stored. Now, The only difference between this section for Metatrader 4 and 5 is this property strict, which you wouldn't need to include with Metatrader 5. But if you do include it, it will just be ignored, so it's harmless. So other than that, this will be the same for the Metatrader 4 and 5. Now this particular expert is going to be based on two indicators, the Bollinger Band and a moving average, so we need some inputs to define both of those. So first the Bollinger Bands, and the default as specified in the strategy was a 20-period Bollinger Band. And a deviation of 2. And that the Bollinger Band would be applied to the closing price. So I have the three inputs here, the band's periods, which I'm defaulting to 20, band's deviation of 2.0, and band's applied price is the price close. And then the inputs for the moving average. And again, the default here was a 9-period moving average, with the method being simple moving average, and the applied price being the price close. So those are all of the inputs that we need to get the indicators for use in this expert. And then there are just some standard inputs that we need in order to process the trades. First thing is a profit and loss ratio. This particular expert defines a stop loss and a take profit, and the take profit is specified by the 9-period moving average. So I'm going to set the stop loss based on a ratio to that, and I'm going to default it to 1:1. Then the usual magic number, a trade comment that will be applied, and the trade volume, which I usually default to 0.01. And now, because I've included this class file, the 10 to 50K class, that includes an actual class, so I just need to bring in an instance of that. And the class name is cCurrentTrade, and I'm declaring a variable called current_trade, and that's a pointer to that variable. We will see the class later. For now, I'm just going to go through this expert advisor and write everything, and then we'll get to the class and see how that works. There won't be much more inside the expert advisor itself. And now the on init section. I need to create an instance of the current trade variable, and it takes a number of inputs, and all of those are the inputs that we had above. So the moving average periods, method applied price, the bands periods, deviation and applied price, and then the profit and loss ratio, magic number, trade comment, and trade volume. Now these are inputs, and that means they're globally available variables, and they are available to the class without being passed in. But I'm using this approach because it's a little more flexible in times where I may want to modify something and pass in a different value to the input. So all these will be available inside the class by being passed into the constructor here. And then in the class, the constructors do not return a value, they're all void. So if I want to know if the class has been successful, I'm going to set a value inside that class instance, and then I'm going to return that value here, the init status, rather than simply return init succeeded or init failed. So the init status will hold init succeeded or init failed. And next there's an onDinit section, and I need to use onDinit because I've created an instance, a pointer variable to an object, so I need to get rid of that when I'm finished. And that's a simple delete statement on that current trade. And the other thing we need inside the expert is the onTick method. And all I'm going to do there is call a tick method on this current trade object. And that's everything that I need to put inside the actual expert file, this MQ4 file. Now the reason I have the MQ4 file rather than just put everything inside the class, there are certain things that need to be here for the compiler to work properly and understand that it's compiling an MQ4 or an MQ5, and specifically these properties must be in the main file. You can put them anywhere you like, but they'll only have effect in the main file. And now, as I said, all of this is going to be common with the MQ5, so I'm just going to copy everything and paste that into the MQ5 file. So all of that is the same. I'm going to leave the property strict there. I said it doesn't matter, so I'll leave that. And now I'm going to create this include file. It's in the same folder as the MQ4 and MQ5. So if I go to Experts, Orchard, if I try to right click here and create new file and select include, it's going to want to change the path to the standard include path, which I don't really want. So I find the easiest way to do that, I'm just going to right click on here, open the folder. Let's open the folder, and here are the MQ4 and the MQ5 files that I've created already. I'm just going to copy one of those, paste it, and change the name, and change the extension to MQH. And then if I right click back here and refresh, and there's the class file. Now the class file is currently empty, so let's put some code into that. I'm just going to start by repeating all the header lines. And now the first thing I need to do here for Metatrader 5, I'll be using the trade.mqh file, which doesn't exist for Metatrader 4, so I need some conditionals. So I'm using the compiler defined variable __ MQL5 _. There's also a _ MQL4 _ and I'll be using both through this code. And this way I can have sections of the code that only compile depending on whether I'm compiling an MQL4 or an MQL5. So if I were to go back and compile this 10 to 50k MQ5, it will pick up this section inside the hash if def. So this is where I'm going to put the include statement for the trade.mqh file. This is supplied with Metatrader 5, but not with Metatrader 4. So if you try to compile this without using this if def statement, they'll get an error simply because the file can't be found. That include file will give me access to the ctrade class and the cPositionInfo class. And so I'm declaring two variables, trade and position info. And now I'll go on defining the class. So first I'm going to create some private variables that are used only inside this class, and mostly these are going to be holding the values that were passed into the constructor. So the moving average variables, I've got the periods, the method, and the applied price, and all my variable names are fairly consistent. So MA periods is the number of periods for moving average. I generally begin these variables with M to indicate that they're member variables. So then the same for the bands values, periods, deviations, and applied price. The profit and loss ratio. Then the magic number, trade comment, and trade volume. Now I'm going to add two more variables here that are private variables. The first one is the init status, and that's what we'll use to hold the result of the initialization on the class so that it can be pulled out later by the expert. And current ticket is where I'm going to be holding the ticket number that's returned when we place a trade so that we can watch for that trade closing later. And now also in the private variables, I'm going to declare some variables that are only used for Metatrader 5, and these are to manage the moving average and the bands indicators. So I begin with the hash if def _ MQL5 _, and then I have the handle to the moving average indicator and the buffer for the moving averages. And then I have a handle to the bands indicator and the buffer for the bands upper, the bands lower, and the band mid. So moving averages have only one buffer, but Bollinger Bands have three, and I need a separate buffer for each of those three. So that's why I've declared three here. And then I finish the if def with the hash endif. And now I have two properties that I want to make available to the expert. So I'm declaring these as public so that they will be available to the expert. And the first is the init status, and this is what is being called by the expert. If I just go back here, we can see I'm returning current trade.init status. So that's calling this property function, which simply returns the value of this variable. Now I could have made the variable itself public, but that's generally not good practice. It's better practice to keep the values private and set up functions to either retrieve them or set them. And then I have the same for the current ticket. And now I also have some public functions, and I'm writing this class differently to the way you may have seen me do it in the past. In the past, I would have declared all of the functions inside the class declaration, and then I create them outside of that using the class name :: syntax. This time I'm actually going to write the entire function inside the class declaration. I'm doing this as a different way to write the class, and it works just as well. There are some instances where it's better to move those functions outside, but for this it won't make any difference, and it can be easier to read and a lot easier to write and maintain this way. So first I declare them as public. That's not really necessary because I already have public here, but it's just a habit that I have. When I begin new sections, I will declare public, and that way if I come along later and convert some of this to private perhaps, I already have the indicator there to say that these are going to be public. And now this is the constructor to the class, and the constructor is just the class name. See current trade. It's always of type void, and there's no need to specify that for constructors of classes. And then the arguments to that are the moving average periods, the method, the applied price, bands periods, bands deviations, bands applied price, the profit and loss ratio, the magic number, the trade comment, and the trade volume, all the things that we passed in from the expert. So I'm simply going to capture all of those values into the member variables that I have inside this class. And now some more code that's specific to Metatrader 5, and this is where I initialize the moving average and the Bollinger Bands indicators. So first the handle to the moving average indicator. This is calling the IMA function, passing in the current chart symbol, the current chart time frame, and then the arguments for the moving average periods. I'm using a shift of 0 because that's not needed, the moving average method, and the moving average applied price. And then I'm testing the handle returned. If that call to IMA was unsuccessful, I'll get an invalid handle returned. And in that case, I'm going to print a message, could not create the moving average handle, and set the init status variable, the minit status, to init failed. And that way, later when the expert calls the function, it will get the init failed from that. And then I return, because there's really nothing more we can do if the handle couldn't be created. But assuming that was successful, I'm going to set the array as series, the buffer MA array as series. I do this so that element 0 of that buffer matches bar number 0 on the chart. And then I'll do the same for the Bollinger Bands. The arguments are slightly different. It's using the iBands function, but still passing in the chart symbol and the chart time frame. The bands periods, there's still a shift, the bands deviation, and the applied price. Other than that, I'll do the same things. I'll check the handle and I'll initialize all of the arrays to series. And now there's one more thing we need to do specifically for Metatrader 5, and that is to set the magic number on the trade object. There are no arguments when placing the trade using the trade object to set the magic number, so we set that once on the object itself. And that's just with the trade.setExpertMagicNumber function passing in the magic number. And then endif, and that's the end of that section that was specific to Metatrader 5. But then the next thing I'm going to add in here, in case we have opened a trade in the past and had to close down Metatrader or this expert and then restart it, I want to find that trade. So I'm just going to call a function to do that, and we'll see that function a little later. So there's my find current ticket function. And then I set this init status to succeeded and end the constructor. Now, this is not going to override these simply because I have the return statement after the failures. So if there is a failure, I'll return and it won't get down to these sections. But assuming we get this far, I'm going to set the status to init succeeded. And now we're in a class, so there is also a destructor. And the destructor is just, again, the class name, but with a tilde preceding it. And it also doesn't need to have void specified. And here, the only additional code I need in the destructor is for Metatrader5, so hash ifdef $mql5 $. And all I need to do is release the handles to those two indicators with the indicator release function. So now we'll look at the tick function, which is where most of the work happens. And I'm already in public section, so once I've declared public, all the functions after this will be public unless I change that. So this tick function will also be public, and that's the one that's being called by the expert. First thing I want to do, because I only want to process when there is a new bar. If we're halfway through a bar and all the conditions are met, then it's too late. I really need to only process at the beginning. I have a new bar function, which we'll see soon, and I'm capturing the value of this with this bool new bar. I'm capturing that now and calling new bar at the beginning because I'm about to do some other things that may cause me to exit this. So first I'm going to check, or first after getting the new bar value, I want to know if I already have a ticket open. And when I do open a ticket, I set this mCurrent ticket value. So if that's greater than 0, it means I've set it. That means I've opened a ticket before, or I found one with this find current ticket. So if mCurrent ticket is greater than 0, then I want to check to see if that ticket is still open and hasn't reached this take profit or stop loss. So I've got another function, is ticket open, and I'm passing in the current ticket number to that. And assuming that returns true, then I'll simply return here. Now the reason I've called new bar there before this statement is because I may have a ticket open when there is a new bar. And then if I left this and only called it after these exits, I may be well into that new bar, like an hour into a 4-hour bar, before this ticket closes. And then the first time I call the new bar function, it will say that I have a new bar when I don't really. So by calling this very beginning, or by calling this at the very beginning of the tick function, it means I know as soon as the new bar has opened, every time after that, this is going to return false. But I'm not testing it here, I'm just capturing the value. And so I will detect the first time I come in on a new bar, and that will be true. Then I'll test for my ticket. And assuming that the ticket is no longer open, so if this is ticket open returns false, then I'll reset this mCurrent ticket to 0. And then I'll check the value that I got back in this new bar. So if partway through an existing bar the ticket closes, I fall through this code here and get down to here, but I will say it's not a new bar because by that stage this is closed. But I want to run this code anyway because I actually want to clean up that existing ticket. So now we've come this far. There are no trades open because we've passed these tests, and it is a new bar because we've passed this test. So it's time to gather the values that we need to open a new trade. First step is to get the values from those indicators. And first I'm going to insert the code specific to MQL4. I do that with this hash ifdef $MQL4 $. So this code will only be for the MQL4 compiler. First I want the moving average value. And this is still the IMA function, but it's a different IMA function in Metatrader 4. Begins with the current chart symbol and the current chart period that I'm passing in. Moving average periods, shift of 0, method and the applied price. But then the next argument here is the bar number. So I want the moving average from the bar number 1, which is the bar that's just closed. Now I want the same information for the Bollinger Bands, so I'm capturing the band upper number 1. This is using the iBands function, passing in the current chart symbol, the current chart period, bands periods, bands deviations, shift of 0, the bands applied price, and the mode upper. This says that I want the upper Bollinger Band, and again the bar number. Then there are 2 more values that I want from the Bollinger Bands, but I also want the values for bar number 2. So the first thing I captured here is band upper 2, which is the bar number 2 value. All of these arguments are the same, except for this shift, which is for bar number 2. And then the band lower 1, this is the same as the arguments above, but here I'm passing mode lower, which will get me the lower Bollinger Band. I'm getting that for bar number 1, and then I'll also get that for bar number 2. And then finally, I want the middle Bollinger Band. Same arguments, but here I'm using mode main, which will give me the middle band and bar number 1. I don't need bar number 2 for that, so I won't have a second value there. That's the end of the MQL4 specific section for getting those values. And now getting those values is a little different for Metatrader 5, so I have another section here that's only for Metatrader 5. With the #if double underscore MQL5 double underscore. I'm calling a fill buffers function, mainly because it keeps this code nice and clean. And that's another custom function that we'll get to in a moment. But also it returns a Boolean value. And if that was unsuccessful, meaning that for some reason I couldn't retrieve values from the indicators in MQL5, then I'm just going to return, and then it will simply loop through the next time there's a new bar. But here with MQL5, the values for the moving average and the Bollinger Bands all come back in the buffer arrays that we declared earlier. So all I need to do to get the moving average value is retrieve it from the moving average buffer at position number 1. It will be at position number 1 because of the arguments we use in the fill buffers, which we'll see soon. The same way the band upper 1 is in my buffer bands upper array at position number 1, and band upper 2 is in buffer bands upper number 2. Now I could have simply used these values later in the code, but in order to maintain consistency and have just little blocks like this that I'm calling out for MQL4 and MQL5, I'm declaring all the same variable names and achieving them in different ways. And so that's the section for MQL5. As I said, we'll have to see this fill buffers soon. So now just some more values that we need to set up, and these are common between MQL4 and MQL5. So first I want the close for bar number 1, and that's the iClose function, which is the same for Metatrader 4 and 5, chart symbol, chart period, and then just bar number. And the same for close 2. My take profit is at the moving average value, and this is why I've captured this buffer MA into the MA variable, because it's the same then for Metatrader 4 and 5 when I get to this piece of code. So my take profit is at the moving average level. I'm declaring a stop loss value that's currently 0. I'll set that later when I determine the ratio for take profit stop loss. And then I need the current bid and ask prices. So now with all of those values captured, we can actually implement the logic to determine whether we need to open a trade or not. So the first test, if close 2 is greater than band upper 2, so it closed outside the Bollinger Bands above, and close 1 is less than band upper 1. So now it has closed back inside the band. And that's the first test before we implement a trade with this strategy. And also, if the current moving average, which is the 9-period simple moving average, is greater than band mid. So I don't want to trade if that 9-period moving average has dipped below the middle of the Bollinger Bands. And the moving average is less than the bid price. So bid will be the entry price when we're coming in from above, because we'll be coming in from above and executing a sell trade. So I want the moving average to be less than that, because moving average is going to be my target. So it really needs to be less than the entry price. If all those conditions are met, then the take profit is going to be at the moving average, which we've set already, and the stop loss will be at the ratio from that price. So to calculate the stop loss, it is bid plus, because this is a sell trade, so stop loss is going to be above the entry price, so bid plus, and then the gap from the bid to the take profit. And remember, the take profit is the moving average, which we said here must be below the bid. So bid minus take profit gives me the gap to that. And I divide that gap, bid minus take profit, by the profit and loss ratio and add that to the bid. And that gives me the stop loss. And then another custom function that I've called open trade, and I'm passing in the trade type, order type sell, the entry price bid, the stop loss, and the take profit. And then if I've passed these conditions and executed that trade, then I'll just return. And now we do the same things in case we've entered from below and we need to execute a buy trade. So conditions are very similar, but in this case I've said if close 2 was below the lower, so we were outside the bands to the bottom, and we've closed 1 above the band lower 1, so we've re-entered the bands from below. And here, if the moving average is less than the middle of the band, so it has to be below, and the moving average is greater than the ask price, ask with the entry price for a buy. So we're going to enter at the ask price, and the take profit is going to be set at the moving average, or it already has been with this statement. So if all that is true, then here the stop loss calculation is ask, which is the entry price, minus, and here the gap is take profit minus the ask price. So we've reversed that because the take profit is higher than the ask, but still divided by the profit and loss ratio, and ask minus that value will give me the stop loss for the buy trade. And then simply calling open trade, but this time passing order type buy, and return. So that's the tick section, but we obviously called a few functions in there, so let's show you those functions now. Now, some of these functions are different for Metatrader 4 and Metatrader 5, so I now have 2 sections where I have the MQL4 only and the MQL5 only. Begin with the MQL4 only functions. Open trade for Metatrader 4, and the arguments to these are going to be the same, so I'm calling open trade for both Metatrader 4 and 5, but the contents of these functions will be different. So for Metatrader 4, I'm calling the order send function. I'm using the chart symbol, the type that has been passed in, which is order type buy or order type sell, trade volume, which is the member variable, the price passed in here, which depending whether we called for a buy or sell would be the ask or the bid price, zero slippage I've set here, stop loss, take profit, the trade comment from our member variables, and the magic number. So that's the order placement for Metatrader 4, and I'm capturing ticket. If that was successful, I'll get a ticket number greater than 0. And in that case, I simply set the current ticket number to that ticket. So now I know that I have a trade open and I can track that, which I did in these sections here, where I was testing if current ticket is greater than 0. And that's the open trade function for Metatrader 4. The isTicketOpen function is also different between 4 and 5. So I'm passing in the ticket number. And then for Metatrader 4, I'm calling order select. Now you normally see order select used with a position when we're looping through trades, but it has a second mode, which is this select by ticket. And so by passing the ticket number and calling select by ticket, it will attempt to find that ticket. And if that fails, then I'm just going to assume that that ticket doesn't exist, and I'll return false, which means that the ticket is not open. If we get through that, then I will have an order selected, and I'm going to test the order close time. Open tickets have an order close time of 0, and as soon as the ticket's closed, that gets updated to the time the ticket was closed. So if order close time is greater than 0, then I'll return false. Now, when you call order select using a position and you use select by pos, you have to indicate whether you're selecting from mode trades or mode history. When you select by ticket, it just looks at all tickets. So you don't need to tell the system whether you want history or open trades. That's why it will bring back any closed trades as well. And so if order close time is greater than 0, it means the trade has been closed, and I'll return false, so the ticket is no longer open. And assuming we get past those two tests, and I can return true because the ticket is still open. And now that find ticket function that we had in the initialization section, so find current ticket. First I'm going to initialize the current ticket to 0, so that if I don't find anything, it will simply come out with the 0 value. And then I'm going to loop through the orders, and that's in the int variable count is initialized to the total number of orders. And then I'm looping through for I equals count minus 1 as long as I is greater than or equal to 0, and looping down with this I minus minus. If I'm able to select, or if I can't select that order, so if not order select with the position, and this time select by pos, and this is why I have to specify mode trades so that I'm not looping through history, then I'll just continue, which will go back and go to the beginning of the loop again. And then if the symbol on the currently selected order is the same as the chart symbol, and the magic number is the same as my magic number, then that must be a ticket that this EA has placed. And so I simply set the current ticket to the order ticket, and then I return. Otherwise it will loop through until we run out of orders. And because I've already set current ticket to 0, when this exits, current ticket is 0, and so I know that I haven't found a ticket. And that's the end of the Metatrader 4 specific functions. So now the Metatrader 5 functions. And the first is that fill buffers function, which I didn't use at all for Metatrader 4. It is here, and that's where I'm getting the values of the indicators into these buffers. I'm doing that with this copy buffer function. So copy buffer, and then the handle to the indicator, buffer number, the start position, and the number of elements to copy. So this is the moving average. It has only one buffer, and that's buffer number 0. I'm beginning at position 0 for 3 values. Now I've reversed the order of buffer MA to set as series. If we go back to the beginning, very beginning, array set as series for both buffer MA and the Bollinger Bands. So that means that position 0 now corresponds to bar number 0 on the chart. I'm bringing in 3, so that will be 0, 1, and 2, and that's all I need. Then I'm doing the same for the upper Bollinger Band. Copy buffer, this time I'm passing in the handle bands, and here I have more than one buffer. And these names are not the same for Metatrader 4 and 5. Let me just scroll back up again. In Metatrader 4, they were mode upper, mode lower, and mode main. those constants are different for Metatrader 5. So I want upper band still from position 0 and for 3, so 0, 1 and 2. And I'm getting this back into my buffer band's upper buffer. And for both of these I'm capturing a count, MA count and upper count, which tells me how many elements were copied by this copy buffer statement. I'll do the same for lower and mid. And the arguments for upper, lower and mid, upper band, lower band and baseline. Now I'm going to test the numbers that came back in these variables. They should all be 3. I've passed 3 to all of these just to be consistent. So if I received less than 3 in any of these, then something's gone wrong. I don't have enough values to process. And I'm just going to return false. And remember, we went back to the fill buffers function. There it is. I said if not fill buffers, return. So if something went wrong in here and I didn't get enough values back for any one of these indicators, I'll return false, and then we'll wait for the next loop. And that can happen if this is called too early after the indicators are initialized, and perhaps the data is not available and hasn't been downloaded from the broker. It would be rare, particularly since we're only asking for 3 values, and because these are values that are coming from the current chart, but it's best to be safe. Otherwise, I'm just going to return true. So if all of these tests passed, I return true. These values have been copied into the buffers, and those buffers are class level variables, so that values are available then. Now the open trade function for Metatrader 5, and I'm using the trade object that we created earlier, trade.positionOpen, still takes the chart symbol, still takes the type of the trade, so enum order type, so order type buy or sell, the volume, the price, stop loss, take profit, and the trade comment. You'll notice there's no argument here for the magic number, and that's why we set that earlier in the code. Trade.positionOpen returns Boolean. So if trade.positionOpen was true, that means we were successful in placing this trade. And then I'm going to assign the current ticket from trade.resultOrder. And that finishes the open trade function for Metatrader 5. Is ticket open for Metatrader 5? So in Metatrader 5 there is a position select by ticket function. And that will attempt to find this ticket, and if it is successful, it will not only select the ticket, but it will return a Boolean value to tell me it was successful. So I'm saying if not position select by ticket, return false. I could have simply returned position select by ticket, but I've chosen to do it this way because there might be a little bit of flexibility I need later in testing the values. But assuming that was successful, then I'm just going to return true. Now I'm not testing here to see if the ticket is still open, because positions in Metatrader 5 are open. Once a trade is closed, there is no longer a position to select. And then the find current ticket method for Metatrader 5 is also different. So still initializing the current ticket to 0 at the beginning, but then I'm using the position info object that we created at the very beginning, and it has a method called select by magic, where you pass in the symbol, and I'm getting the chart symbol and the magic number, and it returns a Boolean value. And if that returns true, meaning I did find a position for the symbol and the magic number, then I can get the ticket number using this positioninfo.ticket method, and I'll put that in my current ticket. And that's the end of the functions that are different between Metatrader 4 and Metatrader 5. So now there are only 3 custom functions left, and these are common to 4 and 5. So first, my new bar function that I use all the time. It seems to look slightly different every time, but it works the same way. But in this case, you'll typically see me put the previous value at the beginning and initialize it to 0. For this function, I'm capturing now, which is a date time type, and I'm getting that with itime symbol period 0. So this will give me the start time for the current bar on this current chart. And when I then declare my previous, which is also a date time, but it's static, so it will hold its value between calls to the function. It will only be initialized on the first call to this function. And I'm initializing it to this now variable. The reason I'm putting that second here is that if you start this expert advisor halfway through a bar, I don't want that to be picked up as a new bar. If I initialize this to 0, then in the next lines, previous will be different to now, and it will say it's a new bar even though we're halfway through. By initializing it to the same as now on the very first call, then I won't get a false new bar indication on the first bar. So the test then, if previous is the same as now, if it's equal, then I'll just return false, meaning that this is not a new bar. And if we fall through, then I reset previous to be the same as now and just return true. And this also shows why I captured this value. Let's go way back here. Remember I said at the very beginning of each tick, I'm going to capture a value, a variable I'm calling new bar with lowercase n, which is the value from the new bar function. So when I do get the very first tick of a new bar, this will be true. Even if I exit at this point, and then the next time I loop in here, this will be false because it's not the very first tick of that new bar. And then we will exit here. So that's why I've placed this statement at the very beginning of the tick section. Because new bar will only return new bar once at the very beginning of a new bar. Then the only other two functions I have, symbol ask, which takes a string symbol and then it uses the symbol info double function with that symbol name and asking for the symbol ask value, and the same thing for symbol bid. And then we just close off the class with the closing bracket and remember the semicolon here at the end of the class. So now that class, apart from having some sections that are specific to MQL5 or MQL4, that's one include file that can be used by both the MQ4 and MQ5. And if I go to my MQ4 and compile, no mistakes, great. So that's used this class. And if I go to the MQ5 and compile, M-bands deviation undeclared identifier. M-bands deviations. That's better. Slight typo there. So that means I've taken all of the logic from this for Metatrader 4 and 5, put it into this single class file. And this is useful if you are working on both Metatrader 4 and 5. So I've extracted everything out into one place and I keep these MQ4 and MQ5 files small. If you've been thinking about it, you've probably realized that the MQ4 and MQ5 files are almost the same, and I can extract a little more from this. These property statements must exist inside the MQ4 or MQ5 file. It doesn't hurt to put them somewhere else, but they have no effect. So I need to leave those, but what I can do is create another include file. You could, if you really wanted to, put all of this inside the class file, but I prefer to keep my class files to only having a class. So what I'm going to do is create a common file. So I've got a common file here, 10 to 50k common.mqh. I'm leaving the comments and the property lines in the beginning. They cause no harm and it's good for documentation. But now I can go here and I can take all of these lines, copy them into this common file. So the common file will take care of including the class file, all of the inputs which were the same between 4 and 5, the initialization, deinitialization, and the on tick. That does everything there. And then I can simply here change this to include the 10 to 50k common, and remove that. And then I can include the same thing for Metatrader 5. So now I've kept the MQ4 and MQ5 files to the bare minimum. That common file, let me just compile them again and make sure everything's working. So Metatrader 4 compiled, and the Metatrader 5 file compiled. So that's the first stage. This is a full working expert that implements the first step of this strategy, where it opens a trade on re-entering the Bollinger Bands with a take profit at the moving average. Now the second part of the strategy is to close part of that trade when we reach that moving average line and let the rest run to the middle of the Bollinger Band. As I said at the beginning, that's a lot of extra complexity and it's too much to put into a single video. So I will leave that for part 2 of the video, which will come out next time. We will extend this to have the second part of the trade running until it reaches the middle of the Bollinger Band. So I hope you found this useful. If you have, click the like button, and if you want to see more of our videos, and remember there is a part 2 coming for this, then click the subscribe button, and if you click the bell icon, you'll receive a notification when we release more videos. So until the next time, thank you for watching.